Welcome to this very special edition of Digging the Details with Jim and Dean. We're doing something different today, something that we've not tried before, which is an audio commentary with one of our favorite Walt Disney movies. I'm here in Arizona with Dean Brinkerhoff. Hello, Dean.
Hello, Jim.
It's fun to be thinking that we're going to watch Walt Disney's Mary Poppins together. We don't get to watch movies together very often, so this is a treat and an extra treat to be talking about it as we enjoy it together, and we hope all of you will too.
Likewise, Jim, it definitely doesn't happen a lot. We're definitely excited for this opportunity. We're at the start of Walt Disney's Mary Poppins, and I'm about to press play and view the Buena Vista title card. We're at timestamp 006. And Walt Disney Presents is on the screen. Very exciting, huh, Jim?
It is, and we're watching this on Disney Plus, and certainly you can all watch along if you'd like as we talk about it.
It's presented in a very nice quality. I believe it's definitely high definition, if not 4K.
Right.
Maybe you know for sure.
I don't, but it's definitely high definition.
It looks good.
And it looks beautiful. We have Peter Ellenshaw's paintings of London in 1910, very romanticized.
Yes.
In fact, when Peter first painted it, Walt felt it looked too realistic, and he asked him to make it look more romanticized. So Peter added some of the clouds and the mists to make it a little more ethereal and not strictly realistic.
He does such a good job.
It's absolutely beautiful. And we also have the overture, one of the masterpieces of all overtures for musical films by Irwin Costell. Of course, using the songs by the Sherman Brothers.
Certainly this could be said for a number of films throughout history, but the opening titles I always love, especially with the Disney overtures, like you just said, so we can see all the wonderful names, the creators that poured their blood, sweat, and tears into the film, and we can really sit and appreciate each one while we listen to the overture.
Absolutely. And I've always thought it's very clever, of all the many clever things that are in this film. They're endless. But introducing Mary Poppins here, visually, where we can see her played, of course, by Julie Andrews in her very first film, for which she won an Oscar.
And what a first film.
Indeed, a tour de force. But how clever to introduce her here, because as the story opens, we don't see Mary Poppins again for about 20 minutes, and that's a long time for you not to see the central character of the movie. So they were extremely imaginative and sharp to show her and establish her as this magical being who's floating on a cloud.
One of the first examples of many, many great special effects in this film, showing Julie Andrews literally floating in a cloud. Not literally, but as we see it on the film, she is.
Exactly.
The introduction of Dick Van Dyke.
And a brilliant idea to have him be a one-man band. Kind of is a motif that he's a jack of all trades. He has the different occupations throughout the film.
Yes.
So here he is playing different instruments all at once. Isn't that what Bert would do? Because apparently he can do anything. And this is an example of how Bert is kind of a reflection of Mary Poppins. He's not magical, but just as she can do anything with her magic, so Bert can do anything with just the person that he is. For those who have read the original books by P.L. Travers, have you read them, Dean?
I unfortunately haven't, but I definitely need to.
They cleverly introduce, again, they are establishing the neighborhood of Cherry Tree Lane, and all these characters that Bert speaks to and makes up rhymes about. They're all in the books by P.L. Travers.
Really?
And they have larger roles to play.
Well, that's certainly intriguing.
Right. So, and of course, this is really the only time we see them in the film, except for Miss Lark's dog, Andrew. We do see him again,
Right.
actually, through here and there throughout the film.
After the overture, of course, this beautiful first song written by the Sherman Brothers for this film and all the rest as well.
And it's a wonderful setup of Mary Poppins' imminent arrival, and it makes it very mysterious and magical. You really know something special is going to happen.
Of course. I know growing up, listening to the music, watching the film, it always gives you a sense of thrill, intrigue, what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's a wonderful setup. And the Bert character is used very brilliantly that way. He draws us into the film. Once he establishes the neighborhood, the different characters, leads us to specifically 17 Cherry Tree Lane, the House of the Banks, he too disappears from the film for quite a while.
Right.
So this is all very beautifully structured.
Lots of good introductions, and then we get into the meat of the exposition with the Banks family once he introduces us to the house. The amazing sound stages done at the Disney studio.
Yes, this is all shot on Soundstage 2, which was officially named the Julie Andrews stage in honor of Mary Poppins and Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins. Of course, here's another neighbor in the Cherry Tree Lane neighborhood, Admiral Boom, and he certainly appears throughout the film. He's their next door neighbor, and he has his own special way of doing things. Bert kind of explains it.
Clever running gag throughout the film of the explosion. A lot of people are fascinated to hear some of the pieces of Mary Poppins that weren't exactly used in the final film, and wasn't it that there was a deleted Admiral Boom song?
Yes.
And a lot of people are fascinated to hear that.
And it's used in the underscore.
Yeah.
The melody, not the lyrics.
Definitely still exists in some form, but
right.
We don't hear the lyrics.
And as you just pointed out, Dean, we do see Cherry Tree Lane as constructed on Soundstage 2. And when you see that shot of the whole street, they use the Disneyland trick of forced perspective, because the buildings actually diminish in real dimension. They're not full-size buildings. As they move down the street, they're actually smaller in dimension. And it's not only like a trick to fit in all those buildings, but it also gives it a charm.
Right. True. I want to visit there. It makes me want to step right into the film. We have visited Stage 2 together.
Yes, we have. Indeed.
So in a way, we have.
Right. And here we have some wonderful character actresses. And we have to point out Elsa Lancaster as Katie Nana.
Yes. Glynis Johns, Rita Shaw, Hermione Badley, all wonderful.
Right. And Hermione Badley was actually signed to a contract by Walt. She unfortunately only played similar roles in two other films, but she's, of course, capable of much more. One of Britain's greatest actresses. I think it was George Bernard Shaw, wasn't it, that said Hermione Badley is goodly?
I've never heard that.
But none of Walt's plans for featuring her in films came to fruition because, of course, as with so many things, it died with him.
Yes.
But he even planned on having her star in a version of Mrs. Eris Goes to Paris.
Really?
By Paul Gallico, who is one of Walt's favorite authors and a friend of Walt's. And that's a beautiful book for those who have read it. There are several film versions of it. And I'll bet you anything it was going to be a musical if they had done it.
Most likely.
It lends itself to a musical, that particular story.
Was she musically inclined, do you know? Because she's certainly in this, The Happiest Millionaire.
Yeah, but she never really does anything musical, so I don't know.
Nothing too crazy, yeah.
I don't know.
Interesting.
But given her reputation, I'm sure she could do it.
Yeah.
And who is Elsa Lancaster? What is she most famous for, would you say, Dean?
The Nosy Neighbor and That Darn Cat. Just kidding. Although I definitely would have said that as a youth.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that answer. But
no, probably her most iconic role would be of the Bride of Frankenstein.
She played the title character.
Yes.
And
amazingly so.
Right, and you said it, iconic. That's an iconic role. But even the smallest roles in this movie are played by somebody amazing.
True, as we'll see.
This is the last we see of Katie Nana in this scene.
Glynis Johns only has recently passed away, so the last few remaining cast of this film are dwindling. We still have Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke.
It's pretty amazing to still have the leads.
Yes.
But we also have Karen Dotrice, who played Jane.
Right. She appeared in Mary Poppins Returns in a brief cameo.
That's true.
As well as Dick Van Dyke.
It's very interesting. Glynis Johns had appeared in 2 of Walt's British-made films in the 1950s. And here she is again. But this was kind of a golden time for her. It was a very special, unique, wonderful, fun actress. And he wanted somebody very special for the smaller role of Mrs. Banks, to give it that lilt. She had just been in the year before, this is 1964, and 1963, I think. She was the female lead in Papa's Delicate Condition, starring Jackie Gleason. And that film's like forgotten now, but it was a hit.
Wow.
So she was in the public eye. And again, at this very time, she was even given her own TV series called Glynis, which unfortunately was not a success. But it certainly shows that she was popular enough and talented enough, certainly, to have her own TV series.
Absolutely. For sure. I did not know that.
I think it really also shows up that in pulling together this film, producing it and casting not only the actors but the artists and the technicians, it's a wonderful blend of new talent and old, meaning the old pros who had been working with Walt Disney for decades, but also new people that had not done a Disney film before. So here we have Glynis Johns returning from several Disney films. But we have David Tomlinson here as Mr. Banks. We have Dick Van Dyke and Julie Andrews, none of whom had made a Disney film before. So all this freshness gives this film part of its specialness is because of that. And that was true behind the scenes as well. The Sherman Brothers were still quite new to the Disney production scene, at least. And I had mentioned Irwin Costell. He was brought in at the suggestion of the Shermans because they felt the movie needed a Broadway sound. And he had been very, very accomplished and award-winning on Broadway, but also on television and movies. He won an Academy Award for scoring West Side Story in, I believe, it was 1961.
Sounds right. Close enough
So-
anyway, if not.
So neither, or how can I say this, none of the traditional Disney music arrangers and composers were used for this film. For example, George Bruns. And of course, there's nothing wrong with any of them, but having this brand new, fresh talent gave it a different sound. And you made it seem very new and fresh and something different, something above the average.
For sure.
Another thing about Glynis Johns is that Walt did indeed want her to play Mrs. Banks, knew she would give it that special lilt, that special quality. She has that amazing voice. She just has a fun air about her. And he had lunch with her and the Shermans, and she unfortunately was under the mistaken impression that Walt Disney wanted her to play the title role.
I was about to ask you, didn't she... I was going to phrase it, and did she audition for her, or was it that she thought she was going to be hired to play Mary Poppins?
Well,
so there you go.
the way that the Shermans always put it is Walt invited her to come to the studio to discuss being in Mary Poppins. She got the impression that he wanted her to play Mary Poppins. So she was very disappointed.
I'm sure.
To hear that wasn't the plan, and she really didn't want to do it. And it is, in fact, a smaller role. And at that time, there was no plan for her to have a song. So Walt said, well, and she may have even mentioned, I was counting on singing. And Walt said, well, in fact, the boys have a very special song for Mrs. Banks. And, next time you come to the studio, we'll play it for you, and we think you'll find it quite delightful. And the Shermans were, like, looking at each other like, there is no such song. But Walt said to them, you do have a special song for Mrs. Banks, don't you, boys? And they said, we sure do, Walt. So as soon as Glynis Johns left, they sat down, and they actually reached into their trunk. All songwriters have a trunk with songs that were written but not used. And one of the many, many songs, and there's quite a few that were written for Mary Poppins but not used, was one called Practically Perfect. Practically perfect in every way, in everything I do, and everything I say.
I think I've heard this, yeah.
They decided not to use it because it was too on the nose, for one thing. But they took the melody, obviously, and made it into Sister Suffragette, giving not only Mrs. Banks an entire song, but giving her more dimension in her devotion to the suffragette movement and making it quite an amusing thing. So it gave her this amusing personality, which of course Glynis Johns plays to the hilt.
Yes.
It just brings her delightful, very unique kind of daffy personality. And Glynis Johns always said, when I think how close I came to not doing that movie, I'm so grateful that I did. And the Shermans told me that whenever they would see Glynis Johns forever after, she would say, like at a party, she would say, come meet the men that made me a millionaire.
Aww.
Because her song, of course, is on the original cast soundtrack, which sold one of the top-selling albums of all time, sold in the millions, and she receives a royalty every time that album is sold. So it made her quite a bit of money.
Yeah, to say the least. Good choice, Glynis.
Yes, and we are the beneficiaries because she is absolutely delightful.
As well as David Tomlinson, who we haven't gotten to delve into yet. He is certainly one of my favorite Disney actors who, like you mentioned, this is his first run for Disney, I believe.
It certainly is.
Because then he did Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and not necessarily next, but in addition to this, and The Love Bug, and I adore him. He's such a great actor.
Yes, and apparently it was Bill Walsh that suggested him. Bill Walsh is the producer and the co-screenwriter. Although David Tomlinson claimed that he had met Walt Disney years before and had told Walt that he wanted to do a Disney picture. But at any rate, he was obviously a favorite for Bill Walsh's, because it was Bill Walsh that produced the next two films and drew upon David again.
Peter Thorndike and for Emilius Brown.
And he wasn't even supposed to play Emilius Brown. Others had been considered, including Peter Ustinov.
Wow.
But actually, Ron Moody had been signed to do. He had signed the contract to play Emilius Brown in Bedknobs, and then had second thoughts and backed out. So at that point, Bill Walsh, wrote David Tomlinson and basically said, "We need you. We would love to have you do this." And David Tomlinson said yes. He said he always loved playing in the Disney films. So once again, came from England to Burbank. And you're right, this was the beginning of all that.
Right.
And obviously, as has become emphasized over the years, and I think overemphasized, but Mr. Banks is actually a key character in this film. So it was crucial, it was essential that whoever played him had to be absolutely perfect. So he does a wonderful job. He's very comedic, but he's very dramatic, and he plays every emotion perfectly.
Obviously, the main arc of the film, I mean, you could say any of these characters have amazing arcs, but his change from being this very stubborn, stuffy father to how he becomes at the end, completely redeemed and saved. It's such a wonderful acting range that David Tomlinson portrays here in the movie, and
it's not heavy-handed.
Yeah.
The way people talk about it, it sounds very heavy-handed to me. And I'm like, are you folks watching the movie?
Right.
It's much more skillful than they would have you believe.
Yes.
Now, one of the problems with Saving Mr. Banks, not necessarily a problem, but an inaccuracy, and a deliberate one, is that in the books by P.L. Travers, Mr. Banks is hardly in them at all. There really is no story. It's a series of incidents. Mary Poppins comes, she takes the children on magical adventures, she leaves. That's all there is to it. And so with the other books that were written afterwards. The Disney team, headed by Walt Disney, of course, felt that they needed a story. So they decided to make the story part of the film about Mr. Banks. When you say an arc, that's what we're talking about.
Yep. That added depth and dimension to, not necessarily to the books, because this is the film, but this story.
Yes, exactly. So there's no real story about Mary Poppins herself per se. She doesn't change.
She remains pretty mysterious, and we don't really quite know who she is, how she became this magical person.
Right, and we resist all attempts at explanations.
Yes.
Because there is no explanation, and there isn't meant to be. So the whole Mr. Banks thing would have, the movie Saving Mr. Banks would have you believe that was all P.L. Travers, which is so fascinating because it's exactly the opposite. That was an entirely Disney invention that they had to convince her of. And it's curious that the movie has it exactly the other way around.
Yeah.
She wants to make the movie about, in the movie Saving Mr. Banks, she wants to make it about Mr. Banks, who's supposedly based on her father. Well, I'm sure that's true, but again, read the books. He's hardly in it. And he indeed is not the one that interviews Mary Poppins. It's Mrs. Banks that has that whole scene that we see coming up.
That's right.
There's Andrew again.
Gotta always point out, I love the animal training that is done in Disney films.
It's always so wonderful and special.
Top notch. Absolute pinnacle.
Yeah, much better than you see in other films. And it's obvious it was very important to Walt, who was, of course, such an animal lover.
Mm-hmm. They make it so you can read the minds. Not to last too long on that aspect of it, I just love pointing it out. You can read the mind of the animal character and...
Well, you might. So this is so delicious that he's completely bowled over by her, just so thrown that she has the advertisement, as they would say in this British film, or British accented film, that he had torn up and thrown away. He's like, how can that be? She's not referring to the advertisement that was printed in the Times. She's saying she has all these qualifications. Rosy cheeks, obviously. So it's a delightful aspect of the Mary Poppins character that she always does things in an unexpected way. Here she's applying for a job. She conducts the interview herself, and she hires herself. And he's so thrown by the whole thing that he lets it happen.
And speaking of the heavy-handedness you mentioned, David Tomlinson has such comedic timing. The way he bonks his head on the fireplace, and then he's sitting there motioning with his hands. How did this paper get put back together? And
right,
tying his tie, straightening his jacket in front of the mirror that's swinging back and forth, and he has to adjust. It's just so, the little touches that's what I love about a Disney film.
He fits perfectly.
Yes.
And especially with this highest quality of material. He plays it perfectly, as you just said, the comedic and the dramatic, and what's ever called, and for all of it over and over again the same time. So
we can't give enough credit to the special effects team on this one.
And indeed, they won the Academy Award for Best Special Effects.
As we head up to the children's bedroom, we should talk about Karen Dautrice and Matthew Garber. We definitely see them in a couple other Disney movies, and one of them being your favorites, Jim, The Gnome-Mobile and The 3 Lives of Thomasina.
The 3 Lives of Thomasina preceded this, and it's pretty obvious that Walt Disney had said, well, here's our Jane and Michael. And it was so funny, so serendipitous, that how everything was coming together in this film at exactly the right time. A few years earlier or later, there wouldn't have been Karen Dautrice and Matthew Garber. They would have been too young or too old.
Mm-hmm.
Just as Julie Andrews was falling into place, so were the children. It's incredible.
Right.
And they are indeed so wonderful. And again, the Mr. Banks thing, yes, but the movie's about the children.
Mm-hmm.
The Mr. Banks thing is about the children. So they're obviously essential.
Yes.
Now, we don't see Mr. and Mrs. Banks again now for a long, long time. So the structure of this film is both unusual and a triumph. And that's one of the things about this film. It really has the most unusual structure that goes against all the conventions. And here is Mary Poppins showing herself to be this magical and most unexpected character. Everything she does is a surprise.
Their reactions are priceless. It's true, isn't it, that they had some of these were, well,
Yes, that's
some of these were genuine reactions.
Yes, that's the story. Yes, they sort of planned it so that they could get spontaneous reactions to what was actually happening. They would have had to plan that very carefully because there was a script and there were storyboards, but it certainly was possible for some of it, as you say.
Correct. The way he's baffled under the table. It's such a smart thing to inspect.
Right.
How is she doing this?
He's such a curious little boy. And he's the one to crawl under the table and so forth.
Talking about them as a duo, I love seeing them together. And we lost Matthew Garber pretty early in his little life, but
yeah, he was only 19.
They're iconic together as children in these few Disney films they did together. And I don't know what you would call this exactly, how it seems Disney movies would pair together certain actors, looking back at the 40s with Bobby Driscoll and Luana Patton, and down in even to the later 60s with Annette and Tommy Kirk. I guess throughout the 60s, I should say. I love the duos that come out of these movies. It's just so fun. I don't know what else to say about that, but
well, it's always,
they're worth mentioning.
It sure is. And it's an amazing chemistry.
Yes. I guess that's most of what I mean, is the way they interact.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Play off each other.
So now we're about to enter the Spoonful of Sugar number, and this song is central to the entire movie. It's the Mary Poppins signature song, and in fact the Shermans had written another one, and apparently Walt Disney had approved it because they played it for Mary Poppins. They played for who was about to be Mary Poppins, Julie Andrews, and she had no problem telling them, quite politely but firmly, in the Mary Poppins way, that it was a beautiful song, but it wasn't for Mary Poppins. It wasn't right for her character. There wasn't enough snap to it. It was too direct, because the movie was through the eyes of love, and how everything changes when you see things through the eyes of love.
Yeah.
She said that's too direct. Mary Poppins would not be that direct. Well, Walt and the Shermans said, you're right. Plus, they wanted her to do the movie. So they came up with a different signature song that is absolutely perfection for her character. And it's incredible to me. I've mentioned this before on the Notably Disney podcast, that this is the incredible strength of this film, where Mr. Banks' song, everything he's saying is actually not true. He's oblivious to what's actually happening. Mrs. Banks is focused on, the movement and what she's doing. She doesn't really know what's happening with her children either. The children have their song, The Perfect Nanny. Well, that's their idea. It's not related to a reality. Of course, it becomes a reality. But at any rate, when this film comes to A Spoonful of Sugar, now we see with complete authority who the main character is. No ifs, ands, or buts. She's taken over. She's going to control everything from now on.
And there's no going back.
Exactly. And it's done musically, which is what must be done in a musical. And even to the point where they cleverly thought, well, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, but they have
up with the music.
Exactly.
The tempo.
Because that's what Mary Poppins would do.
Mm-hmm.
She always does the opposite of what's expected. She's all about the unexpected.
I love hearing Robert and Richard Sherman talk about their creation of the music and how they cleverly added in that, because they knew that's what Mary Poppins would do, just as you said.
And you know the story behind how they came up with the concept of a spoonful of sugar, correct?
Correct. Wasn't that... Was it Greg? Or was it Jeff? I don't remember which son. I should look that up, but...
I believe it was Jeff.
Jeff sounds right.
It was Robert's son.
He had come home from school and said that he'd gotten the vaccine, that
the polio
polio vaccine, right? That in order for them to take it, they made it easier by taking a cube of sugar,
as opposed to a needle.
A needle, yes, in a spoon. So naturally, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. It sounded like it had a ring to it, and Robert was so excited he started thinking about the ins and outs of it, ran to Richard, said, "Hey, I've got this idea," and Richard hated it. As they say. Who knows if that's embellished or whatnot, but that's what I've heard him say.
Yes, he absolutely said that. That's the whole thing about their relationship.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that Richard could allow himself
to like the song.
Immediately like the concept. But he said, as happened with other songs, he thought about it and said, wait a minute, this is actually a really great idea.
Yeah.
Had to think about it for a while.
That rivalry they had,
so,
I don't know if you could call it a rivalry per se, but...
Well, I think you're thinking of the sibling rivalry type thing.
Uh-huh.
So that's a good way to put it.
Their attitudes towards each other.
But at any rate, they came up with this perfect signature song for Mary Poppins, which sums up her philosophy and is actually rooted also in the events or experiences, if you will, the background of the book, because the nannies were known for giving nasty medicines. That's one reason the nannies were not well loved. So they gave horrible tasting medicines. And this is a reference to that. I'm not sure they thought of that, but it's there. And in A Perfect Nanny, they say they don't want her to give
no castor oil or gruel.
Yeah. Right. They want treats. They want sweets. So what could be sweeter than that? But it's amazing to me how when Mary Poppins is about to sing A Spoonful of Sugar, she has that little introduction. The movie holds its breath. And the movie's saying to you in every single way, here we go. This is it. Never mind what you've seen so far. Here's the most amazing person that has just blown in with all obstacles taken out of her way by her, and she's taken over.
Focus here now.
Here we have another beautiful view of the opposite side of Cherry Tree Lane, the park. And now that everything has been established, we're back to Bert. We're back to Bert talking to us. We're back to Bert drawing us into the movie. We're shifting gears again. Here is, aside from the spoonful of sugar tidying up the nursery sequence, here we have the first amazing adventure that Mary Poppins is taking the children, Bert, and us on. Brilliantly set up by having him draw the pavement pictures.
I'm sure this is true of many people, but this is certainly one of my favorite sequences. Whenever we get to the opening here with Bert, I always get a little twinge of excitement. I get, all right, here we go. We're about to jump in the chalk drawings.
And that proves...
Never gets old.
That proves how brilliantly this is set up.
Yes.
And
we sit here quietly with him before the rest arrive of the cast.
And again, as a reflection of... He's a reflection of the Mary Poppins character in that he has complete authority here. He is telling us exactly what he's doing and who he is, and he's saying, look at this wonderful art. And then indeed we see it. Then, of course, Mary Poppins takes it a step further, a giant step further.
Huge. Fantastical step.
And it's a lovely integration of these four characters at this point. Bert knows the children. He knows Mary Poppins somehow. They have an ongoing relationship. Both P.L. Travers and Walt Disney insisted that it would not be and is not meant to be a romantic relationship, but they have a wonderful close friendship. And it's, who else could get close to Mary Poppins than Bert? Only he could. Only he sees her, understands her, knows of her magic. No one else does.
Absolutely.
And we have integrated in this scene right here with Bert pretending to be a tightrope walker in the circus, some of Dick Van Dyke's signature physical comedy that he was so brilliant at.
You have to have that. He's not tripping over an ottoman, but he does a lot of great other things.
And we see in his TV series many examples of extended physical comedy, like you just saw. Sometimes inadvertent, sometimes deliberate, like here. Now, here we have a very special cameo. That is the hand of Peter Ellenshaw.
Is that really?
Yes, drawing that.
Wow.
That's not Dick Van Dyke's hand, that's Peter Ellenshaw's.
Although to give Dick Van Dyke credit, I think he's a good enough artist. He probably could have done that, right?
Well, that's a good point, Dean. Probably many of our listeners don't know that Dick Van Dyke is himself an artist, especially as a caricaturist.
That's something I learned from you, Jim.
And again, here we have the integration of the characters. Only Dick Van Dyke playing Bert, only Bert could manipulate Mary Poppins. No one else could do that. No one else could convince her to do magic. She, of course, always denies any knowledge of such nonsense and never explains anything, of course. But here, he knows how to make her do it. Mm-hmm. And here we have one of the most wonderful of all Disney animated sequences, the Jolly Holiday sequence, and it's so wonderful how the production design, the art design is as a chalk drawing, and this is lovely at the start where they're brushing the chalk off themselves,
and even the costumes feel reminiscent of that same palette and color feel of the chalk drawing.
Look at the backgrounds. It all looks like it was drawn with chalk. And that's one of my favorite lines in the entire movie when Mary Poppins says, "Don't fall down and smudge the drawing."
Right. So many good lines.
Something that a nanny would say, but it has the fantasy, the comedy, the kind of ridiculous nonsense to it, all in one. So I'm sorry, you were going to say? One thing that I was thinking about is even the live action portions that they're standing on. That's all an actual set.
And it looks like it fits in.
Yes, it's designed to blend in.
And of course, what I was going to say, I just remembered. A lot of people do, at least from my experience being in the younger generation, the millennial generation, they see Mary Poppins and they're like, wow, Disney broke a lot of barriers integrating live action and animation here, but I'd like to point out this is not the first time that this has happened in a Disney film. There's many that preceded this, but certainly this is one of the greatest.
And it's a technique that Walt was very taken with in the 40s. He had even started with it in his first success in 1923, which started the whole Disney thing.
The Alice comedies.
having a live action girl in an animated world, which is exactly what this is.
When continued through the 40s, throughout the few of the package films, if not all. In fact, I think all did have some sort of,
to one degree or another, yeah.
And then Song of the South and So Dear to My Heart.
And Song of the South is very interesting because it has different approaches.
Right.
It has the live action character in the animated world, the animated characters in the real world, and it's beautifully done. And Disney wasn't about taking the easy way. It was always the most creative, imaginative way. Well, how are we going to do that, Walt? Well, you'll find a way.
We're going to pave the path.
And this number, the Jolly Holiday musical number, and indeed the entire sequence, is one amazing illusion after another. From the very simple to the very complex. All about this glorious holiday that's possible because of Mary Poppins' magic. By the way, this is, you often hear about P.L. Travers' objection to the animated portions. Even the Sherman brothers, supposedly, were not keen on the idea of having animation in the film. But this is a chapter from the book.
True.
Mary Poppins and Bert jump into a pavement picture.
Mm-hmm.
What else would it be? How else would
better than Walt Disney to execute it that way?
Only Walt Disney could have done this. This is why he was the one to produce Mary Poppins. And other people had approached P.L. Travers, including Rodgers and Hammerstein. They wanted to do a stage musical. So, but only he could have done all these amazing illusions, one after another. You think you've seen it all in this point in the movie? It never stops.
Mm-hmm.
It's just endless. Again, a reflection of the Mary Poppins character, who, just when you think has done every amazing thing that she can, she's topped herself, and she tops herself in the next chapter. Now, this verse where Mary Poppins sings "It's a Jolly Holiday" with Bert, to Bert, was added to try and make clear that this is not a romantic relationship. Why couldn't it have been? Because she's above all that. No one could. She's too elusive. She's too unknowable. She's another kind of being. But I remember seeing Dick Van Dyke interviewed on Larry King, and he asked her about. He asked him, rather, Dick Van Dyke, about this whole thing. And he said, well, Bert is in love with Mary Poppins, though. And Dick Van Dyke agreed, and he said, I certainly played it that way.
I think that's apparent that he's respectful, but he just can't help it.
Right. Well, he adores her. And who wouldn't? Again, this is reflective of the actual reality. P.L. Travers was, of course, British. She was writing out of the British experience. Some people didn't even know what a nanny was. I think Mary Poppins really made everyone aware what a nanny is. But even the Shermans said they didn't even know what a nanny was. When Walt said, well, do you know what a nanny is? They said, a goat?
Uh-huh, yeah.
And he said, no. So they apparently had never even heard the term. But as all fans of Downton Abbey and Upstairs, Downstairs know, there was a very strict order of the way that servants in an Edwardian household, in this case it's the Edwardian era, but before and after too, would conduct themselves and would just live their lives. And nannies really had no lives outside of the children in their care. So this was as we see Mary Poppins, what does she say? She says she requires every other Tuesday afternoon off.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a whole lot.
It really isn't.
Otherwise, she was taking care of the children every single day. And she wouldn't. So nannies often were never married. Their whole lives were other people's children. So here we have almost a funhouse mirror, a reflection of that idea. So, especially for Mary Poppins, her companion would have to be somebody very special. And he would almost have to be respectful of who she was and her position. Because was a nanny to Mary, that would be the end of their career.
Right.
And they certainly could do that. They were free to, but that they would no longer be a nanny, nor would they be hired to be a nanny.
Something I love about the penguin sequence here is that each penguin is individually moving on his own merit. They're synchronized, sure, and they're dancing, but I love the detail that maybe this one's foot comes up at a different exact point than the one next to him. It just feels so realistic, yet, animated at the same time. The way that they have to duck every time Dick kicks his leg, and I appreciate when it's done with such care, the animation.
And really only Walt Disney would do that. Only Walt Disney would have 4 identical characters, and yet they're all doing the same thing, but they're doing it in a different way, as you just said.
Right, and only Walt would pick the animators who would have that talent to do it.
And in this case, it was the legendary Frank Thomas who was the directing animators of the Penguins. That's such a great point.
They're all each reacting in different ways, and
that goes all the way back to the Three Little Pigs in 1933, which is considered a triumph of character animation, because basically the pigs are identical characters. They look exactly the same, yet Walt thrilled to the fact that they acted in an individual way. And he said, at last we have achieved personality and character animation. Well, fast forward to 1964, and here again, we have these identical characters, as you just said, Dean, acting in very individual ways.
It's sometimes typical of like television animation where they'll cut a few corners here and there, and they'll just recycle, okay, we're going to copy this character animation a couple times over so it looks like a big group is moving together, but the care that they took to individualize each penguin, for example, is just astounding to me, and like I said, I appreciate it.
A wonderful touch here is that the carousel horses, each of the characters are riding reflect the way that they look and are.
Yes.
And Tony Walton, who was Julie Andrews' husband at the time, and it was a production designer, he was hired as a consultant for the film. He designed the costumes and many other things, another of the fresh talents that worked on this film.
Yes.
He said that he painted Mary Poppins' horse, and Peter Ellenshaw painted Dick Van Dyke's.
And the Walt Disney Archives still has them to this day. At least Bert's and Mary's.
Yeah, they look at these. Look at Michael's. It has that fierce look on its face.
Yeah.
It's so hilarious. This is just lovely, and the art direction is shifting here to show, or maybe I should say, the background painters. They're shifting toward this whole fox hunt sequence now, and it has a more autumnal feel.
Yes, that's a good point.
There's leaves on the ground. There's colors in the leaves. It's just it's just so funny one after the other. Everything that's shown, each character has the most delightful design.
Even if they're on screen for only a few minutes, a few seconds.
Yes, exactly. That first horse even had a monocle,
Yeah.
like its rider did.
Do you know who voiced the fox? I feel like I knew at one point, but or if he's even worth mentioning.
I think it's Dale McKinnon.
Okay.
Now, folks, if you're listening to this and I'm wrong, you can
cut it out.
You can leave.
Full fact check.
We can leave. You can leave a comment, but I believe it is Dale McKinnon. Just there's so many adventures just in this jolly holiday sequence. Who's expecting a fox hunt, and then it becomes a horse race. None of this is expected.
The twists and turns.
I mean, all of this that's in the jolly holiday sequence would have been enough for most movies.
Yeah. They always have to plus it.
Indeed, and it always must return to Mary Poppins' character. And of course, she is going to win the race. It could be no other way.
On a merry-go-round horse, of all things. The absurdity and surrealism of Disney films is one of the main reasons I love them.
And this movie is the crystallization of that. Her character and all that she can do lends itself to that. Everything has such an absurdity to it that's the perfect word, Dean. And as the Spoonful of Sugar song says, in a most delightful way.
Yes.
They play upon this very dry British humor. And what's the next song that's coming up?
It's a very fun word.
And a very long one. It kind of goes back to having to look back to a time when, of course, this word was completely brand new.
Mm-hmm.
And what a surprise it was. What a delight. Everyone delighted in it. It was a sensation. The word and the song themselves. Now we kind of almost take it for granted. Of course, we've heard
Supercalifragilistic.
And one of the genesis of the, can we say that? One of the genesis? Is there plural?
The genocide? I don't know.
One of the starting points for the song is that the Sherman Brothers felt that the children had to have something they could bring back to the real world from this fantasy world of the chalk pavement picture. Well, what could they bring back but a special word? It couldn't be a physical object. And of course, this is a musical, let us never forget. So that special word is a song. So again, in brilliant musical comedy style, it's not just a delightful number that's so wonderful to listen to and see. It's integrated into the story and has an important meaning later on. It also plays upon the conceit of Mary Poppins that she always denies knowledge of any of these adventures. When the children want to relive it, she claims it never happened.
Right.
But they do have the word and they do have the song to remember that it did happen. What is your favorite song from Mary Poppins, Dean?
Oh, that's a good question.
Maybe you need to think about it.
Well, there are definitely some obvious choices. I love Mr. Banks's The Life I Lead. However, if I have to pick one, it's going to be Feed the Birds, which is typical. It's usually a favorite. But that one, just like Walt Disney, and I'm sure we'll chat more about this here in a little bit, that was one of certainly his favorite songs of all time.
This whole transition back to reality for the characters, the idea that it starts raining and washes away the chalk, is a wonderful, again, just one of the many, many wonderful imaginative ideas. How would they return? It's not just that they simply do. It's this very visual, beautifully done, where you see the backgrounds washing away behind them.
Yeah,
and
true.
They're back. And there's a poignancy to this. There's a very striking moment in the film. And this is a callback to the idea that if she's insisting they have some medicine, it's going to be something horrible. And of course, they each get their own delightful flavor, and even the colors are different, coming out of the same bottle.
Love the reactions. The little
Yes.
squeals.
And this is a place where Karen Daughtry always said that she had no idea. Quite satisfactory.
Jim, do you have a favorite song? Since you asked me, I figured I bounce that to you.
It's, and my answer is the same. It's almost impossible to say. I'm delighted to hear you say The Life I Lead, because I don't know that most people would pick that. So I'm thrilled to hear that from you. But I'd have to say, of course, Feed the Birds, just as you did. But also A Spoonful of Sugar, because as I was saying earlier, it's so central to this film and to the character.
I love
Mary
the way you
Poppins.
explained that, too.
Thank you. And this is exactly what I was referring to, where she denies any knowledge. It never happened. In fact, they're to be reprimanded for even suggesting that she would do any of these things.
All she feels is denial.
You can never pin her down. She's always elusive. And then, of course, this is very much her as well. If she's going to sing a lullaby, which is all about now's the time to go to sleep, of course she's saying, stay awake.
Stay awake.
Don't go to sleep.
Song that's always made me sleepy. I'll tell you what.
Well, it's interesting. The controversy rages. The question has never been answered. Was there ever an intermission? Anecdotal evidence suggests that some people did see the film with an intermission, and there is an actual intermission card.
Really?
Which some people feel was only in England.
Huh.
But I know of people who, rightly or wrongly, remember seeing it with an intermission. Where is the intermission, if there is one? I myself, by the way, saw the print at the Walt Disney Studios. Not in 1964, mind you, but I went to a screening for employees, and the print they were showing had an intermission card. And it comes right at the end of Stay Awake.
Fascinating.
Which is the exact right place for it. It's almost like, again, the movie starts over in a sense. And a lot of these big musicals, they have that sense. The intermission happens, the audience kind of steps away. When they come back, the movie has to reestablish itself.
Correct.
And that's sort of what happens here. By the way, Admiral Boom's first mate there, Barnacle, played by Don Barclay, I never knew until quite recently that David Tomlinson does his voice. His voice is dubbed in. And if you
Really?
listen carefully, you can recognize that it is David Tomlinson.
What on earth?
I know.
Was there a particular reason for that? I'm sure there is, but...
I'm sure there is. I don't know it. I don't know if they just didn't like the voice that he gave, or he was doing a lot of modeling for Disney. So he did a lot of things that did not require his voice. So maybe he wasn't comfortable. I don't have the slightest idea. But I would be tempted to not believe the story until you listen to his voice, and it is David Tomlinson. You can hear it.
That's interesting.
He's doing a comic voice, but you can tell by his inflections and so forth that it's him.
Wow.
Do you know the other part? Did you know the other part where he plays? There's actually several, but he actually.
Yes.
You do know where it is?
I do know where one is, anyway.
Okay, well, we'll wait till we get to that point, and you can reveal it at that time.
Put in the comments below what you think it is for the audience.
I think a lot of people do not know that.
It's a fascinating piece that I didn't know for a long time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people questioned who it was. But anyhow, listeners, if you don't know what we're referring to, stay tuned. You'll find out later. Actually, much later.
Much, much later.
In the film. But this scene is all about how Mary Poppins her influence has indeed permeated the entire household. Even the servants who are usually so at odds and so unhappy with everything that's happening. And everyone's delighted about it, except for Mr. Banks. And it's never stated, but I think it is kind of a power thing. I'm not sure he even realizes it himself.
The household's in hullabaloo.
Again, this is the idea that he's out of touch with reality. He doesn't even know his own feelings. He insists that he's in a good mood, and he's obviously not.
Such a good point. Here we go again, Admiral Boom.
And Glynis John's voice works so well when she calls out, "Posts, everyone, please."
Mm-hmm.
And her voice is just perfect for that. And everything is designed so perfectly.
All the details here.
That little bus almost falls over twice, almost falls on top of him.
The tension, and then the piano
it rolls
shoves it away.
Right.
This is just commonplace for him. This is happening every day.
And according to Bill Walsh, Walt would visit the set, and as Bill Walsh said, would get vibes off of it. And he would say, "Oh, here Mrs. Banks could catch the piano. Here she could straighten the pictures." He thought of a lot of those ideas just by looking at the set and walking through it. So that's quite interesting to know. Mary Poppins mentions Mrs. Corey's gingerbread shop. That's an entire chapter in one of the books.
Wow.
So
all you're making me want to do is read the books, Jim. That's great.
Well, I hope everyone reads them. They are in some sense quite different.
Of course.
But the main difference is the real lack of any story. They're more mystical. But Walt Disney, of course, was creating this for his audience and making it a little bit more palatable and tangible, but not much. They carefully maintained the essence of the books. This is one of my favorite scenes, of course, where Andrew is speaking to Mary Poppins and she understands every word that he says.
It's quite remarkable.
And Michael is having none of it. It's quite comical.
And then what did he say?
He said thank you. Oh, no, I got that wrong. He said you're welcome. Michael says, I don't think he said anything. And that's where some of her sarcasm comes out. She says, well, you think you know best, as usual. There's much more of that in the books.
Really?
There's much more of her sharp tongue and being sarcastic.
Fascinating.
But you can see how cleverly they weave it all together. And in this scene, playing Uncle Albert, of course, we have a Disney favorite. Who's that name?
A man by the name of Ed Wynn. Not Edwin. Ed Wynn. One of my absolutely top comedic actors, top actors ever. Everyone loves Ed Wynn. He's sort of Walt Disney's Lucky Charm.
Indeed, he considered him to be such. And you could see where his kind of personality would tickle Walt. Walt first used him in which film?
Throwing it to me? Alice in Wonderland.
Yes.
As the Mad Hatter.
I'm asking you, and that's correct. Yeah.
He's in quite a few of them, but that was the first.
He has that very distinctive voice, which really shows his distinctive personality. He has such a distinctive voice that we hear people imitating it, and I don't think anybody even knows where it comes from anymore. But that was his voice. And he's a complete original. And of course, he was well known for his giggling. So how perfect to have him play this character, the man who can't stop laughing.
Right. Somewhat of a modern example is Alan Tudyk's performance of King Candy in Wreck-It Ralph for the more modern audiences who would recognize that character. He's somewhat reminiscent of Ed Wynn. Played in that style.
In fact, I would say it even stronger myself. I'd say it's definitely Edwin's voice that he's performing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many other. That's a great Disney example and a really current one. I was surprised when I saw it.
Me too.
I was like, oh, does anybody even know who that is anymore?
Right.
But fantastic. But what a great bit of casting. Physically, he fits the role as seen in the books. By the way, the books are illustrated by Mary Shepard, and that they're an important part of the Mary Poppins world, just as the Tenniel drawings in Alice in Wonderland are, just as the Ernest Shepard illustrations for Winnie the Pooh are part of that whole world.
Right.
That whole look, it's not just the writing, it's that look. And speaking of all that, who was Mary Shepard's father?
I'm guessing Ernest Shepard?
Exactly. The illustrator of Mary Poppins is the daughter of the illustrator of Winnie the Pooh.
That's wild. Did not know that.
And for those that look carefully, Mary Shepard's drawings of Mary Poppins show a certain resemblance to Julie Andrews. Of course, that was decades before anyone would have known that Julie Andrews, who was a child, would have grown up to play Mary Poppins, especially her nose. And that's what P.L. Travers said to Julie Andrews when she first met her. Well, you certainly have the right nose for it.
Uh-huh.
So I find that to be an amazing coincidence. And
she was destined to do this.
She really has the Mary Poppins look. Mary Martin had actually been asked by Walt Disney to play Mary Poppins. She was offered the role. She could have said yes. It would have been a completely different movie.
Yes.
But also, Mary Martin does not have that look.
No. Julie all the way.
It's really incredible how it all came together, as we were saying a little while ago. Again, we have this wonderfully imaginative and funny idea of the tea party on the ceiling, which comes directly from the book. And how is one able to float into the air in this circumstance? By laughing. And of course, Mary Poppins does not need any such conceit. She does not laugh. She's kind of scolding them for laughing. And then when she wants to join them on the ceiling, she simply floats up.
Lots of fun puns and banter in the scene that always cracks me up.
And this was a Disney technique that was developed really for the absent-minded professor, where when you have a sequence of that involves nonstop special effects, almost every shot is done in a different way. So that just when the audience is thinking, "Oh, I see how they're doing it,"
yeah,
they do it in a different way. Sometimes it's an upside-down set. Sometimes it's what we would now call green screen. Sometimes they're on wires. It's a constant shift.
And perhaps I'm correct here. Tell me if I'm wrong. The films that precede Mary Poppins, like The Absent-Minded Professor, Son of Flubber, those types of movies that have all kinds of special effects, were sort of great trial runs for something grander like Mary Poppins, correct? That I don't know if they necessarily had that in mind, but they certainly did play out that way.
Yes, I think that's it more than anything.
Yeah.
I think that it turned out to be true, because there was still a question whether they would even do Mary Poppins. But they knew they were moving toward it, and it was the same team. It was Bill Walsh as producer, Don DeGrady as producer and co-writer, Don DeGrady as co-writer with Bill Walsh, and director Robert Stevenson. But I see how cautious you're being, and I think you're right. I think it's very professional of you to be so, because they would not look at The Absent-Minded Professor as a trial run for anything.
No.
They just looked at The Absent-Minded Professor as that project.
It just sort of happened to
right.
play into, well, we need all these special effects, and we've already done them. Let's
right.
do them in a different way.
We know how to do it.
Yeah, it just evolves.
And the sequence in that film, of course, that's the triumph, is the basketball scene. One reason being it's so lengthy.
Yes.
And
impressive to this day.
Yeah, it's just still so eye-popping to see all those basketball players rise into the air all at once, and then the different ways in which not only is it achieved, but what's supposed to be happening.
Even mind-boggling.
Yeah, so in a sense, certainly when it came time to actually produce Mary Poppins, they could say, well, look at what we've already done. Now we're going to do that and more.
Right.
We're going to top it. And Walt Disney had always told P.L. Travers, we know how to make a movie like this. We know how to do Mary Poppins magic. That can never be overemphasized. And listeners, I know you think I am overemphasizing it, but the whole point of this movie is Mary Poppins and her magic. Everything that happens, even the non-magical things, everything that happens in the movie is because of her.
I wholeheartedly agree.
There has never been, and never will be, I dare say, a more magical character. There are other characters that have magical powers. She can literally do anything. It's very interesting to me that Ed Wynn, who was so well known for his comedy, you know, he had a hit radio series. He'd been on Broadway, vaudeville, everything. He, at this time period, had become a dramatic actor and was very acclaimed for his dramatic performances, both in movies and on television, culminating in, of all things, The Diary of Anne Frank, one of the most serious films you could possibly imagine.
Right.
And he played the dentist friend of the Franks that they invite into their hiding place. And if you would like to see a dramatic performance, see Ed Wynn in that film, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award. That was, I believe, 1959. So not that many years before this.
Correct. And again with the infiltration of the bank's home of Mary Poppins and her magic.
Yes, and she's about to do something similar that she did in the interview scene, where here she's going to be fired, and she just takes complete control of it and reverses it.
Right.
And it's very interesting again that he's seeing to him all these things that are happening that he disapproves of, and he doesn't even really understand himself. Why would he be firing her? Everyone is happy. She's doing everything she's supposed to be doing on the surface, caring for the children. And I think it's a power thing. He doesn't like that his power, his authority in his mind is being undermined. And is that really a good reason to be firing a successful employee?
In his mind, yes, but for the audience, it's
Right.
like, what?
Right. For the audience and all the other characters, including Mrs. Banks. She's like, are you sure you know what you're doing? Of course, it's all framed in this comedic interaction of the characters. It's very funny. And of course, she's actually in control. Doesn't matter what he says. She's going to wrest the control. She never lost the control. She'll just exert her actual authority by agreeing with him. Now, if you had asked someone who had never seen this film before what was going to happen next, could they have possibly anticipated the whole feed the birds thing? This is incredible that this is what this is leading to.
Right.
And she is setting all of this up. She puts in his head the idea of taking them to the children to the bank. And that's one thing. Then another thing is she has this beautiful story of the bird woman. That puts in their head the idea of what to do with the tuppence, creating this entire conflict, but it mushrooms into a financial disaster at the bank. How would you have anticipated that?
Right. That's it.
All of this
Snowball effect, butterfly effect.
and these are all Disney inventions. This is the storytelling, but taking the existing character and making her make the story happen.
It does directly come straight from everything she's influencing.
Exactly as you proposed. He didn't propose it at all.
Yeah.
She did. Again, he's completely bamboozled. He doesn't even know what happened or how it happened.
Good idea, quite right.
I am never sacked because I would never permit that to happen.
Right.
She is in control. And they know. Jane says you must have put that idea in his head.
They've probably seen so many come and go.
This was another P.L. Travers thing. She insisted that Mary Poppins must always be respectful. She would never overtly contradict Mr. Banks or anything, because that's, again, a reflection of the role of the servants.
Mm-hmm.
No servant would ever do that. And so she actually is doing it, but she maintains the I guess the conceit that she would never do something as impertinent as contradict her employer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's hear it. Let's hear it, Dean. What are your thoughts about this incredible song?
Well, where do you start? I'll just say that at first. Feed the Birds just encompasses so many feelings, so many expressions of charity and goodwill and doing good to those around you, which is charity. Just exploring that definition there. But I've always found it very emotionally stirring. The lyrics and the music, it's pure magic. There's no other way to get around saying that. I genuinely feel that way.
I agree with you. It's very emotional. But again, it is framed with the Mary Poppins character, because she would never say those things directly.
Uh-huh.
She says it through this story, which is, it's almost like a bedtime story, except in the world of the film, it's real. There is a bird woman.
Yes.
And she's setting this all up so they will see her in the morning. But
And Michael will say, "Oh, I want to give her my tuppence."
they understand the deeper meaning of it all, thanks to Mary Poppins. Mr. Banks doesn't, because he can't see past the nose on his face, as she says.
Yes.
So, for those that don't know, this is again a chapter in the P.L. Travers book. She tells the children of this bird woman. And the Sherman Brothers took that and turned it into a song. It was not original with Disney. It comes directly from the book. What deep, and of course this again, everybody, this is a musical. I think the art of the musical and the appreciation for the musical has been lost a little bit in modern times.
Correct.
But this is musical storytelling, of which Walt Disney was a master. This is taking something very important and giving it an emotional heft that, even as beautiful as it is, it wouldn't have if it wasn't a song.
Right.
And it's part of the Mary Poppins character that she sings. It's an important part of her character. In fact, they ask in the advertisement, as the British say, sing songs. That was one of their requirements.
That's
She's
right.
singing a song.
The perfect nanny.
They would have never anticipated it would be as profound as this. And I say, nobody in the audience saw this coming. What? This depth, this beauty, this emotion, what is going on?
And the way the music swells, just it gets better and better up till the end when it turns soft and sweet again as she's tucking them into bed. It's just the perfect sequence.
Then this is their dreams. It's been planted in their dreams even. When they wake up in the morning, that's all they think about. It's incredible storytelling, because the movie turns a corner here. And it's Mary Poppins that did that through the song. People have often said how I've heard people say how surprised they are by this out of left field thing. And then look what happens in the rest of the movie. Now, another shift here is, once again, we do not see Mary Poppins again for quite some time.
She's absent for a while.
Yes, the only thing that's left is her presence and her influence. All quite on purpose. Who also has been missing for quite some time now and will not be seen again for quite some time. Bert. His re-entry into the film coming up in a few minutes signals us that something else is happening now. Now, of course, I'm not talking about Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke we're going to see very shortly here. What
Correct. Yeah.
What am I referring to? Why don't you tell everyone what Dick Van Dyke's up to here in this scene in the bank?
Well, he was cast as another character of Mr. Dawes Sr. here in the Fidelity Fiduciary Bank, and it's something that I did not know when I watched it as a child, and my dad, you know who that is, don't you? What are you talking about? It's just some old man. Nope, that's Bert. What?
That's wonderful.
That's my experience learning that. It's fascinating to see. Of course, Dick Van Dyke can pull this off, but what a wonder! What a beautiful thing it is that he got to play this character, and
this very caricatured old man.
And again, the physical humor that Dick Van Dyke
right
could only do, really. And the other amazing thing too is when they asked him to reprise his role he doesn't reprise this exact role. He plays a different old man entirely in Mary Poppins Returns, but Dick Van Dyke famously says, "And this time I didn't have to put on all the makeup because he's ancient. He's an old man now."
Yes, the role he plays in
Mary Poppins Returns
is Mr. Dawes Jr., who is a character here. That, if you're looking at the screen as we are, that's Mr. Dawes Jr. on the right. Supposedly, that's the character he plays in Mary Poppins Returns.
Right. And I love the stories of him taking full advantage of this costuming and makeup, that he would go around and cross the street like an old man on purpose, and then he'd start zooming off in one direction as fast as he could and getting reactions from people. What a guy. Dick Van Dyke came to my city only a few years ago, and I got to hear him speak about his experience in Mary Poppins, and he loved doing it, of course, and had so much to say about Walt Disney and Julie Andrews that was over the moon positive, and you can tell it's one of the greatest treasures of his acting career, being in Mary Poppins as these two characters.
What was that? What was it, like a lecture or like a one-man show? Or?
He came to a Comic-Con here in Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
He did a panel and then did a meet and greet, and me and my uncle got to take our picture with him.
Wow, fantastic.
One of the highlights of my life, that's for sure.
That's wonderful.
Another wonderful song, full of wonderful alliteration.
And this is another example of an unexpected song. I don't think anybody saw this scene coming either. And it's it's the art form of the musical, that again, a song is taking us to a different place in the story. Since Julie Andrews is not on the screen, let's talk about her.
That's a good idea.
We had mentioned that this was her first movie. What can you tell us about that story and how it came to be that she was cast as Mary Poppins?
Walt Disney had seen Julie Andrews in Camelot on stage and went backstage and sought her out to directly give him an answer. Would you play Mary Poppins in my movie? And I think it's been said that she was kind of taken aback, like, oh my gosh, like, is this really happening? What's going on? And, you know, kind of flustered. But I don't know if she immediately said yes or if it took some persuasion, but Walt immediately knew that she was destined to be his Mary Poppins. And
yes, absolutely. He would have, of course, been aware of her as the star of My Fair Lady. I mean, it's probably known. The Walt Disney Archives would know if he saw that show. I'm guessing he did, but of course, it might have been a performance without her because it ran for years. It was such an enormous hit, and she was only in it for a certain amount of time. In fact, she then went to London to play in My Fair Lady on the London stage. So whether he'd seen her, but he would have been aware of her because of the album at least, and the album was a huge bestseller. But Bill Walsh and the Shermans and Tommy Wilk, who was Walt Disney's secretary, all saw Julie Andrews do numbers from Camelot on the Ed Sullivan Show, and independent from each other, they all said, "Oh, she would be perfect as Mary Poppins."
Wasn't she, in fact, a reference model for Anita? Inadvertently? Yes. Well,
yes, inadvertently, yes. She never came in to do that or anything, but Milt Kahl based his design of Anita
after what he'd seen of her.
Yes, yes, absolutely. He loved Julie Andrews, and this was before Mary Poppins, had nothing to do with Mary Poppins, but she was certainly not unknown. And Jack Warner, who did not cast her as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, never claimed that she was unknown. He just said she's not a movie star, which was accurate because she had never done a movie. So he did not cast her, and Walt Disney took the risk of casting this unknown in movies actress. But was it a risk? He knew what he had in mind. He knew, and I think that anybody that knew the character of Mary Poppins would know she would be perfect. Interestingly, there are people that protested at the time because they said, well, she's much younger than Mary Poppins. But P.L. Travers herself insisted that Mary Poppins was actually 27. That's what she was asked, and she said she's 27. And that's exactly the age that Julie Andrews was.
That's right.
So other people may have had a problem with it. I think they had a concept of a nanny as an old lady, like a grandmother type.
Right.
But of course there were young nannies. And according to P.L. Travers, she was exactly the right age. So you're right. Julie Andrews did not immediately agree, but Walt invited her to the studio and said, we want to show you the storyboards, we want to play the songs for you, and we hope you will do it. And Julie Andrews identified two challenges. One was that she had just found out that she was pregnant with Emma and, would be leaving Camelot and going to have her baby. And Walt said, no problem, we'll wait for you. And the other thing was, Julie Andrews said she was hoping that Jack L. Warner would cast her as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, because everybody knew that movie was going to be made, coincidentally at the same time as Mary Poppins. Many people say, oh, we would have never had Mary Poppins if she had played Eliza Doolittle. Well, who knows what would have happened in reality? But Walt Disney specifically said, if he casts you as Eliza Doolittle, we'll wait for you.
I think we've talked about this.
Yeah. I mean, he's Walt Disney. He's not gonna say, oh well, too bad.
We're just gonna move on.
He would hold up the whole movie for her.
He would have halted that whole production.
Especially when he saw her in person in Camelot.
We'll accommodate anything for you as long as you can make it to the film. Yeah.
And one fun thing, and I could have brought this up during the Spoonful of Sugar sequence, he was especially wowed by her whistling, because in the song "What Do the Simple Folks Do," part of the song is she does this very elaborate whistling, and she herself to this day will say, "I was always a great whistler," and then she says, "All singers are." Well, I don't know about that.
Before we get too far away from this, I did want to mention the quick cameo of the old crone that talks to the children before they run into Bert is the actress Betty Lou Gerson, who is also known for someone else in a Disney film, Cruella de Vil in 101 Dalmatians. Now, Jim, did she do any other roles for Disney? I feel like she did, and I can't remember at this moment.
She's also the narrator of Cinderella.
That's right.
In very honeyed tones at the beginning of the movie. So
good range.
Exactly. Wonderful range.
I love how Bert cheers them up and the way he explains their father's situation to them. And
yes, it's fantastic. The writing is so wonderful. And the undertone here is that Mr. Banks obviously has no idea what became of them, and Mrs. Banks is leaving, and it's Mary Poppins' day off.
Collision of lots of, I don't know what I'd say, but they're not quite there for the children, are they?
Right.
Jim, do you have a favorite scene in the film that jumps out to you? Have we seen it already or not yet?
Well, I just gravitate toward that Spoonful of Sugar.
Yeah.
Scene. It's so powerful.
So along with your favorite song, it's that whole scene.
Yeah, and then of course the whole Jolly Holiday thing is an amazing sequence. But there's many. There's every scene is great. What about you? Do you have a favorite among the many?
Mine is coming up, and I love the part right after Step in Time. I forgot how good Step in Time is as a song. That's
right.
Honestly one of my favorites too. How can you pick? It's like picking your favorite children out of all these wonderful songs, you know. But
yes,
when they come back to the Banks home and all the chimney sweeps are in there dancing and causing mayhem, chaos in every single wake. That one's fantastic. It's so funny to me, the way everyone interacts.
Now this bit of the Chim Chim Cheree song is so haunting and mystical. And this is one of the rare times where Walt asked the Shermans to rewrite something, because originally this part of the song, I guess it's the bridge, he was describing how the rooftops of London are so magical that you could see the Taj Mahal and all these wonderful landmarks. And Walt said, no. If that is sung, the audience is going to be looking for those things,
right?
And we're not going to see them. So he asked them to rewrite it. And of course, what they rewrote is so much better. It's so much stronger and more specific to the mysticism of the film.
Mm-hmm.
The mysticism of Mary Poppins. A note about her costume. This is supposedly her day off, and she's wearing this red outfit, whereas usually her the colors of her costume are more muted. So this and her, even her shoes are lavender. So this is showing another side of her when she's off on her own.
What on earth is she up to?
Yeah, and that's the reason that in the dark cloak she wears, if that's the right word, the coat that she wears when she flies in, it has a red lining. And Tony Walton deliberately designed it that way to show that there was something underneath the kind of conventional drab nanny, stereotypically nanny look.
Right.
That's one of the things that he did to show that she had an inner life. There's more to her than what's on the surface.
That's true, and just all, I don't know if you'd call them contradictions, but all the way that she's just defying expectations, the way she powders her nose with more soot.
Yes, exactly.
Just so many great details.
That's one of my favorite moments in the film. It's hilarious.
And just worth pointing out that, you know, everything that she does has to have this fantastical, unexpected meaning, or not really a meaning, but just to make it so.
Agreed.
Poor Michael. Just good, clean soot. Do you know if Dick Van Dyke had much opportunity to ad-lib? I always feel like that was kind of a fun spur-of-the-moment line, but maybe not.
It could be, I don't know. But generally speaking, there isn't actually a lot of ad-libbing.
Yeah, I figured.
In these films. But could be. I don't know. I don't know that the specifics are known.
That's what wasn't sure.
Although, of course, one could look at the script.
That would be an interesting thing to look at.
They're also carefully designed and planned. You know, this was storyboarded.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
In addition to the written script.
Could have been a storyboard gag, or even on the set. Oh, just say this, or it'd be so funny. I always try to imagine how that went. It's pure speculation.
Well, that's good. It's good to wonder about these things.
Such a beautiful transition with the matte painting.
Yes.
Makes one wonder how that was done. If you know.
Well, Peter Ellenshaw said the painting, he painted it in sunglass, then he put pinpricks. There were pinpricks in the painting that you would not see until you put light behind it. So he put light behind it, and the light came through the pinpricks.
So then the lighting would just naturally make the rest of it look darker. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, that's what he said. And I'm sure he was giving a simple version for the layman, and I'm making it even more simple.
Absolutely.
Because I'm not Peter Ellenshaw. But it was, the lighting behind it was a very movie thing. It's not just us turning on a lamp.
Mm-hmm.
It was controlled to have it gradually, so that the lights of London are blinking on, twinkling on.
Just neat that it has these red hues, red tones, and then it slowly turns to the darker black and blue.
Yeah, I'm just describing the lights. There's probably much more to it than that. But like I said, it's a simple explanation.
Oh, yeah.
Peter Ellenshaw was very good at explaining things so that those that are not so advanced technologically could understand them. I saw that in Disney Family Album.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's an excellent storyteller and could just say it very succinctly and in a way you could understand it.
Was there a whole episode devoted to him, correct?
Devoted to Peter and Harrison.
Awesome. Yeah, that's right.
The Ellen Shaws. The first family of special effects.
Amazing. I need to rewatch that. I know I've seen it, but it's been many years.
That's one of the ones that I wrote. One of the episodes.
Wonderful series for anyone in the audience who has not seen or heard of it. Go check it out.
Everybody working in the film wanted to make this a spectacular, the Step in Time number, a spectacular song and dance in the great tradition of the Hollywood film musical. And when you really think about it, there hasn't been an extended dance sequence in this film yet.
True.
Until now.
Yeah.
And it's yet another surprise emerging from the seemingly the seemingly bottomless carpet bag that this movie is. Just when you've seen it all, there's something even more amazing.
Indeed.
But they saw it as a real musical. Everyone did, from Walt on down. And indeed, it stands aside. It stands next to the greatest dance sequences in any film musical.
Yeah, it really makes you think back on some of the great musicals of the time.
Mm-hmm. These big dance sequences were an important part of the makeup, the overall makeup. Another thing that's so interesting about this as a musical is that Mary Poppins is included in all the musical sequences, even if it's not her song. In Chim Chim Cheree, she sings part of the last verse. Mm-hmm. Here, she's incorporated into the dance. This is not her number. She's mostly a spectator, but they made sure that they included her. In I Love to Laugh, she sings some of the evaluation of the ways different people laugh.
Yeah.
And it's all in character. And that's something that was done in The Wizard of Oz, too. Judy Garland always has a role in each musical number, even if it's not her number.
Right.
They were very careful to do that, certainly for most of the songs. And it's the same in this for most of the songs.
I can see why. You want to make sure your leading lady is right there and involved, and
especially when it's someone of that talent as Julie Andrews, but mostly because of who the character is and who the movie's really about.
I love in this sequence they take the time to really just go all out with the insanity of the movements.
And this is where this becomes a real Disney number. They have this amazing dance sequence, but these elements with those kind of trick shots, only Disney would do those.
Right.
Only Disney could do those. Admiral Boom is played by Reginald Owen, and he was a big character actor of the Golden Age. He was a contract player at MGM, and is in a lot of MGM movies, a lot of big ones. He even plays Scrooge in the MGM's version of A Christmas Carol.
Interesting. I could see that.
That's a huge role, obviously. But Disney had used him in those Moochie TV shows that he did. Moochie of the Little League and, well, I guess it's actually Little League Moochie, and Moochie of Pop Warner Football. He plays the the neighbor. There's two British gentlemen, and he's one of them. And one he's the one that supplies the lot for them to play on. So in the 50s he was doing that for Disney, and then here he is.
Was this the last time he did a Disney role?
No, he's in Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Really?
As General Tiegler. Yes, he's the leader of the Old Home Guard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that was his last movie. He actually died, I think, in 1972, and of course Bedknobs was released
I
in
would
1971.
never have guessed that.
Right. Drive the Hun back into the sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Of course,
Yes.
here is my favorite scene of the
Yes.
film where they're
And
all
it's
infiltrating the house.
So
the home.
comical and so brilliant to have Admiral Boom shoot off the fireworks, and they all
scramble.
They all jump down a chimney, and it's the Banks chimney.
Yep.
And then this whole thing continues on.
It seems like they went quite a ways away from the home, but then all of a sudden they're they're back.
Well, is that true, though? Because Mary Poppins said it's time to go home.
True.
Time we were in from the cold night air.
So she did
So
lead them
wouldn't
back.
she go right back to their own chimney? That's where they're centered
Good
around.
point. Good point. I've never put that together.
Now, do you know that coming up fairly soon is the most important shot in the entire movie, according to the Sherman Brothers?
Which shot is that?
Well, I will point it out when we get to it. Hopefully, you are definitely wondering. Hopefully, our listeners are wondering too. But it's a profound insight into this film, not from me. It's not my observation. It's the Sherman Brothers. We have another amazing moment between Mr. Banks and Mary Poppins coming up. When again he's trying to exert some control over all this, and she says the famous line, "I never explain anything."
Yes. As you say, she does not give in. She's like, huh? What are you talking about?
Right.
Gives it right back to him.
That's that.
That's that.
Up the stairs she goes. Now, it's interesting that you had mentioned the song "The Life I Lead" as one of your favorites. The Shermans brilliantly use that throughout the film. And Mr. Banks sings different versions of it. There's like 4 versions of it through the film.
Mm-hmm.
Coming Up is one where he's expressing his frustrations, his doubts, how has his life come to this. It's very fascinating. And then Bert kind of turns it on its ear, helping him to see that he may not be fully understanding what's really going on.
Uh-huh.
But the real, I think the importance of that is it's again seeing Bert as a reflection of Mary Poppins, because only he could explain this to Mr. Banks, because Mary Poppins would not. It's too direct.
Uh-huh.
But also he uses a spoonful of sugar to do it. Only Bert could quote Mary Poppins' signature song. And it's like Mr. Banks' signature song versus Mary Poppins' signature song.
Oh, yes.
It's quite brilliant. And the whole film has come to this point.
This is a turning point.
Exactly. He blames Mary Poppins for the whole thing, but the thing is, he's right. It is all because of Mary Poppins.
And that is the point.
Yes, he just comes to see it in a different way. It's not a negative, but a positive.
His perspective finally starts to change.
Yes.
Realizes his not maybe his missteps, and the way his perspective was skewed in the worst way possible.
That was a good word.
'Cause he still loves his children and his family, but he was trying to do the best he could with what he understood and knew, and now he's humbled.
And it's also the way this world works, which is a subtext to it, because audiences in the United States don't have a concept of this. We have a special person to take care of our children full time.
Right.
They dealt with that a little bit in Downton Abbey, where the older generation, they're grown children in the show, to have much more hands-on with their own children. That's alien to their older parents.
Right.
The older parents never saw their children. They might see them for a few minutes a day when the nanny brought them in to say goodnight. That's it. It was the nanny that was raising them, not the parents. So that's de-emphasized. Mm-hmm. This movie is Americanized.
Right.
And Walt was the great showman that knew how to do that. He makes it seem very British, but it actually is quite Americanized. Not quite, but enough Americanized.
Mm-hmm.
For his, U.S. audience.
Should I bring up the elephant in the room, Jim? The one that always seems to get brought up that we despise. The accent. Dick Van Dyke's, I don't know how you would say.
Well,
I wouldn't say like it's a big thing to point out, but I feel like for us it's good to point out in a way that explains it better.
Well, we dealt with that pretty extensively in digging the details.
Yeah.
But I just sum it up by saying I don't agree. I think it's quite deliberate. It's a comic stage accent.
Correct.
It's not a bad accent. It's just unrealistic, and it's meant to be so.
He was deliberately asked to do this role.
Right.
It's not like they were like, oh,
this
guy sucks.
They weren't going for authenticity.
Correct. Which one may, say one way or the other, was that a good choice or not? But I think he does wonderful.
Yeah. To me, it's just a comic stage one. That's the way I sum it up. Now, coming up in just a moment is the most important shot in the film. Mm-hmm. According to the Sherman Brothers, we have this very poignant moment in this movie where the tuppence is a symbol, and that's all been so beautifully established in their childlike way. They think that giving him the tuppence is going to solve everything. So here it is. You just saw it. There it was. The most important shot in the entire movie is Mary Poppins looking down. Why? Because according to the Shermans, that shot shows that Mary Poppins was responsible for having the children give him the tuppence. And therefore, in a larger sense, she's responsible for everything that happens. Because everything that happens from this point on springs from that moment.
Absolutely. I see that.
I was at a presentation that they did at the Disney studio, the Shermans that is, and they played different things from Mary Poppins, but one thing they played was the musical scene between Bert and Mr. Banks that we just saw, and they extended it to show Mary Poppins up on the staircase, up on the landing. And when the lights came back on, they said, we deliberately had the projectionist show it up to that point because that's the most important shot in the entire movie.
And it goes so quick, you blink and you miss it.
Right. But that was put in very, very deliberately. Because think about it now. Once she said, I never explain anything, and she goes up the stairs, except for that one shot. This is another time in the movie where she disappears for an extended amount of time.
She was there for a moment and
look,
then gone.
Everything that happens is because of her, and from this point on, it all springs from the tuppence. He looks up at the cathedral and he's like, I don't understand. He's trying to understand. He said there's something about this.
Right.
So certainly one thing that's been pointed out is the amazing sets in this film. It had a big budget, especially for a Disney film. They're quite elaborate. Yet on the other hand, look at this boardroom when Mr. Banks gave it. I mean, look at the main body of the bank.
It's large, but I mean,
and ornate.
Yeah.
But when he goes into the boardroom, it's just like red carpet and drapery and the big table and the chairs.
Doesn't have that detail necessarily, that ornateness.
And I think it was either Leonard Maltin or Christopher Finch. One of them said this movie has sets that would not be out of place on a Broadway stage. Well, this set in the boardroom is exactly that. That's the sign of somebody in the that's been in the military, that they give a quick polish to the shoes. I'll bet you anything that came from Walt.
Probably.
That little touch. See, look at this. It's all light. It's all done with light and dark and the color red.
It's very ominous, and it really adds to the mood. The tone of this scene is very heavy.
Yes.
They all look very comfortable.
But it's interesting because they're kind of reflecting the British bank life that Mr. Banks thought that he wanted. I mean, obviously they are the British bank. But it's the same sort of thing. They want control. They want to maintain control. And they think they have it over Mr. Banks just because they have the power to fire him.
Correct.
Well, he turns that on its ear when he has his great revelation. It's not true. They don't have that power.
That's a powerful moment in of itself for him.
Right.
And that all, like you said, the ball starts rolling from Mary Poppins. He finds that power within himself to live the life he lives, or live the life he wants to lead, rather than the life he does lead currently.
That's very profound. This is an important point coming up soon, but he stops singing his own song, and he sings Mary Poppins' song. Remember?
He gives
it's
in.
Mr. Banks' theme versus Mary Poppins' theme in the scene with him and Bert, and Mary Poppins' theme wins because he starts to sing himself a spoonful of sugar. And this is all very pseudo-military, as if he was being court-martialed.
Yes.
It's
found it to be
very,
pretty funny.
It's
and
very
jarring.
funny. It's very sharp and satirical. I don't know for sure, of course, but I credit Bill Walsh for this because that's very much his sense of humor.
The hole punch through the hat.
Right. So here we go. He has this revelation. Why? Why does everything shift into focus for him? Because he finds the tuppence in his pocket. Now he gets it.
And then he's
Brilliantly, everything is brought
completely flipped to to her song now, and
it's the word, the supercalifragilistic word. It's the joke from Uncle Albert.
everything that was infiltrating the house. And Dick Van Dyke's reaction always gets me. He cannot fathom what Banks just said to him. How dare you?
It's so funny. Impertinent, sir.
Oh, he's amazing. The man's gone mad.
It's very interesting. He's trying to give him the tuppence, and he says, "Don't you strike my father." Like he thought he was going to hit him. That's how out of touch they are.
Yeah.
It's just giving him the tuppence.
There's a little foreshadowing at what's to come. The kite flying.
Yes, which was set up way at the beginning of the film.
And
they asked their father to help them
to finally get that done. I can't say enough how wonderful it is the way he performs as Dawes Sr.
I agree.
Every little moment with it.
And then speaking of the character, he too is transformed.
Yeah, that's true. He has his revelation and dies laughing, huh?
Hysterical. Mary Poppins said she would stay until the wind changes.
And now it has changed.
And now it is time for her to go.
Very sad day. At least until 2019. Thereabouts. But we won't talk about that. Now they know Mary Poppins at this point, and they're not as impressed by the carpet bag and the tricks she's packing it up.
Yeah, they're focusing on just that she's
leaving, and they're sad.
Constable Jones is played by Arthur Treacher, who again comes from Hollywood's golden age. People would certainly, the audiences in the 60s would know him from the classic movies. He was in a number of the Shirley Temple movies. But this is a real character part for him, for sure.
Wonderful cast all around.
Yeah, every role, large or small. He's singing what? Bill Walsh line, if ever there was one.
There's a kiss in the Mrs. Banks.
Freed from the cage that's the size of a bank, as Bert had said.
That's right. As the movie comes to an end, you can really feel the joy and the peace that's entered the home, and Mary, as she's leaving, just knows her job is done and is on to whatever's next, and has no emotion one way or the other about it. Her job is done.
Right. Well, at least she's trying not to show that emotion.
Correct, yeah.
So, as a musical, this is, to me, one of the most brilliant things is that up until this point, Mr. Banks had his patter song, which is all very, it marches along. It's all very much the same. But now he's full out singing a full-on song. And it's not his earlier song. It's not Mary Poppins' song. It is his own song. And it soars.
That's a good observation.
We didn't even know he really could sing. He was like doing that speak song type thing.
Right.
Here he's actually singing.
He's found himself.
And her contribution, because one thing that's not pointed out, but he repaired the kite with pages from the Times, which is a symbol of his role as a proper English gentleman who works at a place like the bank. Well, never mind that. He cut up the Times to repair the kite. And Mrs. Banks adds her sash, her Votes for Women sash.
Puts that to the side
So
for
the
now.
whole family has joined together. And the kite is indeed a symbol.
It's beautiful how it's all put together. And Bert, do anything Bert. He's selling kites now. Or giving them away, whatever he's doing.
He's selling them for sure.
Of course, like we had hinted at earlier, the other David Tomlinson cameo is coming up.
Right. And just when you think there might not be one trick left, there is one trick left in the film. But wooden leg named Smith, or was it Jones? He doesn't get it, but it's okay.
Yeah.
And father died laughing. Oh, I'm so sorry. Nothing of it. I never saw him happier in his life. So we've seen the parrot-headed umbrella throughout the film. Mary Poppins always holds it so that it can observe everything. And finally now, it's speaking. One last trick left. And who's doing that voice, Dean?
None other than Mr. Banks, David Tomlinson.
You don't fool me, Mary Poppins.
I like how he can become different characters.
Yes.
I wouldn't have guessed that as a child, or, whatever age. When I was younger, before I knew.
Oh, it was years before I knew.
Yeah.
I never knew until it was discovered. I certainly didn't figure it out myself. But how great that you've seen that wonderful parrot head throughout the film. And now it's talking.
And off she goes.
You can see the red lining there.
Yeah, you're right. Sure enough. Well, as we come to the end of Mary Poppins, it's a great chance to see the names of the cast and and Jim. There's even one more little
Surprise.
Yeah, it just never ends, does it?
And I do love how the chorus takes up the triumphant, joyful, all-encompassing, wrapping up the story so that everything soars. Here it comes. How joyful.
Rousing chorus, like you said.
A true musical. Of course, we didn't even talk about Jane Darwell, the great character actress who plays the very small but very important role of the Bird Woman. But here we have the surprise. Mr. Dawes Sr. is played by Dick Van Dyke.
I wonder what people's reactions were to that back in the 64 when it first came out.
A lot of people were very surprised. We thank you all for listening to our audio commentary. Dean, I thank you very much. What a treat to watch it with you. Watch this great triumph of Walt Disney's and one of the best films ever made by anybody, and to hear your wonderful insights and observations. So thank you very much.
Likewise, Jim, especially as we celebrate its anniversary this year. It's wonderful to look back on all the wonderful memories and all the great talent that went into this film.
And thank you very much for bringing up the subject that it is the 60th anniversary of Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. I don't recall that we mentioned that earlier, but that's the whole reason we're doing this audio commentary right now. So a great celebration of this wonderful film, and we thank you all for being with us.
And we'll see you next time here in Tulgeywood TV.
And be with us for more Digging the Details, where hopefully we'll all go fly a kite.
No charge.